All right, hello out there. My name is Thomas, and I do educational videos on this channel of mainly obscure and esoteric stuff that I think is important, and it needs to be just kind of fleshed out, made more accessible, and exposed, more or less. And we have been doing many videos in the last month or so on the reciprocal system of theory, which is a system of theory or theory of everything developed by Dewey B. Larson back in the 20th century up until his death back in 1990, and then forwarded more by Dr. Bruce Perrett, Dr. KVK Nehru, Dr. Gopi Krishna, and others up until the present day. It's still a very, unknown theory. Very few people. I've never actually personally met another person who's ever heard of any of this. So, but it's wide open. It's right out there. Dewey Larson has books on physics, astrophysics, chemistry, astronomy, economics, and we are looking at his final book that is on metaphysics, which actually came out after he died, uh, into the realm of the religious, the psychological, philosophical, things like ethics and free will, and so on. And we're in we're about to start chapter 10, which is called Revelation. And just a little more background is that so Larson had a revelation back in around 1930 that pointed him to this theory, and he developed that revelatory encounter for the next 20 years or so until he arrived at his two fundamental postulates. And then from there, he took those postulates and he created, through a process of deduction, he created an entire theoretical universe about how the universe theoretically should be according to his postulates. And he found that his universe compared pretty closely with the actual universe that the scientists had developed through observation, measurement, and hypothesis, and so on, experiments. But that it did differ markedly in the realms of the very small, the very large, the very slow, the very fast. And so he attempted to kind of shore up those discrepancies. And so the gist of the theory, the first fundamental postulate, the physical universe is composed entirely of one component, motion, existing in 3 dimensions, in discrete units, and with 2 reciprocal aspects, space and time. And the second fundamental postulate is that the physical universe conforms to the relations of ordinary commutative mathematics. Its magnitudes are absolute, and its geometry is Euclidean. Now, a lot of Larson's followers have had problems with the second postulate, but the second postulate is really not that important because it really is just almost axiomatic. In order to really even be a scientist and to engage in these conversations, you need to, conform to the relations of ordinary commutative mathematics and believe in absolute magnitudes. Now, the Euclidean geometry is the sticking point. Bruce Perrett has come along and really said that he believes that the geometry of the universe is projective, of which Euclidean geometry is a subset. So he's not specifically negating what Larson is saying. He's just broadening what Larson is saying. He's saying that Euclidean geometry is part of it, but in certain other realms, the Euclidean geometry gives way to a more inclusive geometry It's a cascade of geometry, Euclidean geometry to metric geometry to affine geometry, and then to projective geometry, and possibly even beyond that to topology. So anyway, these are the fundamental postulates, and then he developed his whole theoretical universe out of that, which includes the book that we are looking at right now, Beyond Space and Time, which are on metaphysics. And in order to arrive at the metaphysical book, he had to arrive at about 4 new postulates, because the metaphysical deals a lot. Okay, so if Einstein is saying that the speed of light is the maximum speed of the universe, Larson is saying that the speed of light is the midpoint or neutral point of the universe, and that there's a half of the universe that's actually moving faster than the speed of light, which doesn't really register with the scientific folks. And then there's the half that moves slower. He calls this sector 1, and that is the realm of the scientific, the chemical, the atoms and the molecules. But once an atom or a molecule moves aggregates into its most complex form, which is the DNA molecule, then it is eligible to be taken over and controlled by a unit from the sector 2, which is the faster than light speed unit. And so that is where life comes from. He compares that to a thermostat, even though that the sector 2 unit is just a minor part of the overall life unit. It is controlling, just like a thermostat controls the environment of the room. The sector 2 unit controls the entirety of the life unit, even though it's primarily made out of that very complex molecule DNA. And then from there, the next level is going to the sector 3, and the sector 3 is really kind of like this neutral point, this speed of light, where space and time resolve each other. Because remember, space and time are reciprocals in the reciprocal system. They are, and they exist in a relationship. All kinds of motion are relationships between space and time. But when you get to the speed of light, it all resolves into 1, because the speed of light is 1 unit of space per 1 unit of time. And so eventually you get 1 over 1 equals 1. And so the space and time resolve each other. It's just in the same way that dualities resolve. And that is, he calls sector 3, or God. It doesn't call it God. I'm just saying that that's what he's dealing with. And the sector 3 unit can take control of the life unit. The most complex life unit is then eligible to be controlled overall by this sector 3 God unit. He calls it control unit. And that is the intelligent human being, or maybe humanoid, that is the most complex form of life. And so once the sector 3 unit begins to take control, it becomes like a competition between sector 2 objectives and sector 3 objectives, which he terms as sector 2 objectives are survival-based. Life is bent on survival, whereas sector 3 is bent on ethics, ethically based. So within the human being is this kind of tug of war that is occurring between survival motives and ethical motives. At times, those motives work together, but at other times they work separately, and the human being has to decide which one is, going to win out. This all looks like, if you've watched any of my Tree of Life videos, this is a sixth sphere thing. This is going on at the sixth sphere of the Tree of Life. Okay, now we're looking into chapter 10 here on revelation. And revelation is kind of a continuation of the two previous chapters on communication, local and general, where we got into intuition and scientific insight that are direct communications from the Sector 3 unit. So the Sector 3 unit is communicating with us. We can't detect this as a physical thing. This is not a physical thing, but it's something that occurs, and that there are levels. You know, there's intuition, insight, or intuition on a general level tends to be very accurate, because it's just, you know, is this right or wrong? Should I do this or not? How do I feel about this? Just general level. But then there's also on a scientific level, and that is a higher level of Sector 3 communication, and it's much more specific, and it's much more difficult to decode. The general idea is that all of our communications with Sector 3, the information that we're receiving is correct. But the question is, are we able to decode the information or translate the information correctly? So I'm taking over here at the beginning of chapter 10, a paragraph in or two. We're talking about revelation. Accounts of sudden illumination of scientific issues under intense study frequently stress this resemblance to religious revelation. For example, Henri Poincaré, the great French mathematician, was particularly interested in phenomena of this kind because of a striking experience of his own, often cited in scientific literature. He had been engaged in studying a certain problem with little success. I'll just point out that Larson could have just put himself into this story because his story was quite similar. Sometime later, as Poincaré was boarding an omnibus with a friend, the solution to a problem came to him instantly. It was as though he were standing on a mountain overlooking the dark valley, which was illuminated for an instant by a flash of lightning. In that instant, the whole problem became clear to him, although it took him many weeks to write down and derive all the relations. If Poincaré had been a mystic, he would have regarded the event as a revelation. Actually, he ascribed the occurrence to his subconscious mind, which he believed had continued to work on the problem after the conscious mind was otherwise engaged. It later developed that men involved in creative work in many fields encountered the same sort of event. Many of them compared the occurrence to a blinding flash of light. Okay, now, he's pointing out how scientific insight has a strong resemblance to religious revelation. And he really says that in our finding is that scientific insight, ESP, and intuition are merely different manifestations of the same process, communication with Sector 3 and the control units. It is now clear that the miraculous flashes of light in science, in philosophy, and in other fields are not only akin to revelation in religion, they are identical with revelation in religion. Okay, now he says, ethical theory, like scientific theory, seems to have originated in the minds of profound thinkers who fell back for justification not merely on experience, but on their own imaginative powers. In the case of ethics, the latter has often been termed illumination or revelation. It can hardly be considered essentially different from the stroke of inspiration at the basis of the invention of a new scientific theory. He's quoting there R.B. Lindsay. Okay, now he's going through more other so-called experts. It is true that there are a host of contradictions between the revelations which the various religions claim to have received, while many more of these purported revelations contradict observed facts. But such contradictions are the rule rather than the exception in human testimony. Experience in courts of law shows that even eyewitness accounts of different individuals often give totally different versions of the same event. A little serious reflection over the history of the nuclear atom concept should help to give the scientists a better understanding of why contradictions exist, how easy it is to misread the message from Sector 3 when it first arrives, whether by scientific insight or revelation, and how tenaciously the human mind, be it scientific or non-scientific, clings to a misinterpretation once it has achieved general acceptance in the community where it originates. As this atomic experience shows, the priests of the scientific establishment are just as dogmatic in their adherence to current doctrine and just as prone to close their eyes to unwelcome facts that disturb the doctrine as the priests of the religious establishment. So that is, and that's, if you read Thomas Kuhn's Structure of the Scientific Revolutions, it shows how, scientists will bend over backwards to hold on to their trusted theory that they grew up with, that they learned in school, in spite of mounds of evidence to the contrary, and that it really even takes new generations of people to, it's a rare scientist indeed who will, turn their back on their favored theory to support a new theory that has more evidence and observation backing it up. And Kuhn looks mainly at the heliocentric world problem and Copernicus all the way through Newton. And I have no comment on the validity of any of those doctrines, but it does show how we cling to the theories that are in general acceptance as we are growing up and that we're taught, like in school. Okay. Revelation is a source of information co-equal with experience. Although this is the traditional religious viewpoint and is strongly emphasized in most of the Eastern religions, it is contrary to some present-day theological views. Just as our knowledge of the religious retreat toward naturalism that has been taking place because of the growing prestige of science. Under pressure from science, those who share this non-propositional view have abandoned the concept of direct communication from a source outside the space-time universe, on which all of the major Western religions were originally based, and have fallen back to the position that any communication from such a source must take place indirectly by means of some kind of an effect on the events of history. And that's kind of, getting at, we look at, say, the Bible, and, it was common for God, so-called God, one of the gods of the Bible, to talk to, Moses or whoever the patriarchs back in the day in ancient times. But if such a thing were alleged to happen now, it would be like, it's time for you to go to the to the insane asylum. That that's something that used to happen, but it doesn't happen anymore. So that's kind of what he's saying there, and that's because of the the emergence of the scientific viewpoint. Ironically, our present investigation demonstrates that this retreat was wholly unnecessary. This retreat of the religious, of the Sector 3 direct contact. Scientists never did have any actual evidence to indicate that there are no metaphysical sources of information, but they have forced the ecclesiastics to retreat from one untenable position to another, and by this time have succeeded in intimidating the theologians to the point where essential religious positions are being abandoned. Once it is conceded that nothing can be communicated to the human race except through human experience, it is only one short step to the naturalistic conclusion that there is no source other than human experience. But now a further extension of scientific knowledge has shown that the previous scientific assumption that the whole of existence is encompassed within the physical universe is wrong, and that the original religious concept of revelation from an outside source is correct. Okay, I'll stop there. Next time we'll go further into this chapter 10 on revelation, and I hope everybody out there has a great day, and hope to see you back here next time.